It rained the next morning, the kind of relentless, that drenching rain that blurred the world into shades of gray and silver. Wyndham House creaked and moaned under the onslaught, its ancient bones seeming to shudder. Elena stood at one of the tall windows, arms wrapped around herself, watching the rivulets of water snake down the glass. Sleep had been a stranger last night, replaced by fragmented dreams, flashes of the ballroom, of faceless figures reaching for her, of a man whispering her name in a voice thick with anguish. She still clutched the newest letter in her hand, the words burned into her mind. Beware the one you love. It was absurd, paranoid. She barely even knew Julian, but deep down she also knew in the marrow of her bones, that the connection between them wasn't new. It was old, older than the house, older than memory, and it terrified her. She turned away from the window, restless. She couldn't just drift through this house anymore, waiting for the next letter to fall into her lap. She needed answers, starting with Catherine Hale. Elena dug out her laptop from a pile of half-unpacked boxes and set up at the battered oak desk in the study. The internet connection was spotty, the Wi-Fi flickering like a faulty heartbeat, but eventually the search page loaded. She typed in the name, Catherine Hale, Wyndham Bay. The results were sparse, a few birth records, mentions in local newsletters. But then one article caught her eye, buried deep in the archives of a faded town newspaper. Local tragedy strikes Wyndham House, young woman found dead. Date, October 17th, 1997. Alina's stomach twisted as she clicked. Catherine Hale, 24, beloved local artist and teacher, was found dead on the grounds of Wyndham House in what authorities have deemed an accidental fall. Miss Hale, engaged to town councilman Julian Hartwell at the time of her death, was known for her vibrant murals and commitment to historical preservation. Rumors surrounding the estate's troubled history persist, but police maintain there is no evidence of foul play. The words blurred as Elena stared at the screen. Engaged to Julian. It couldn't be the same Julian, could it? No, the dates didn't add up. Julian Hartwell, the mayor she knew, couldn't have been in his 20s in 1997, unless the connection was deeper. Family. Blood. Elena scribbled down the name, her hands trembling slightly. She needed to confront him. She needed to know what he wasn't telling her. But first, she needed to breathe. Grabbing her coat, she slipped outside into the storm, the wind slapping cold against her cheeks. She didn't care. She needed to move, needed to shake the crawling feeling threading through her veins. The gardens behind Wyndham House, or what remained of them, were a tangle of dying rose bushes and crumbling stone paths. As she stumbled through the wet grass, something caught her eye, a small, half-hidden stone arch overgrown with ivy. Compelled by some instinct she didn't understand, Elena pushed through the vines. Beyond the arch was a forgotten cemetery. Dozens of old, leaning headstones jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Some were so worn the names were unreadable. Others bore dates going back centuries. Elena wandered among them, the rain plastering her hair to her scalp, until one headstone stopped her cold. Catherine Hale, 1973, 1997. Gone too soon. Loved beyond measure. Someone, recently it seemed, had left a single white lily at the base of the stone. It lay there, rain-slicked and trembling. Elena crouched down, tracing the letters with her fingers. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know why. A crack of thunder split the air, and behind her, the bushes rustled violently. Elena whirled around, heart pounding, but saw only the empty, dripping garden. Still, she could have sworn, just for a second, she had seen a shadow slipping away into the trees. By the time she returned to town, the storm had eased into a steady drizzle, the streets slick and gleaming. Elena headed straight for the town hall, a squat stone building that looked more fortress than office. Her boots squeaked against the polished floors as she made her way to Julian's door. It was ajar. She hesitated, then knocked softly. "Come in," Julian's voice called, rougher than usual. She pushed the door open. Julian sat behind a heavy oak desk, papers scattered in front of him, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up, his hair damp as if he'd been out in the rain himself. He looked tired, shadows etched under his eyes, jaw clenched. When he saw Elena, something flickered across his face, relief, fear, longing, all tangled together. "I need to ask you something," she said without preamble. Julian leaned back slowly in his chair. "I figured you might." Elena stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her fingers tightened around the folded newspaper article in her pocket. "Catherine Hale," she said. "Who was she to you?" Julian's expression shuddered. He stared at her for a long moment, the silence between them thick enough to drown in. "My aunt," he said finally, voice low. "She practically raised me after my parents died. She was everything to me." Elena's breath hitched. "I thought." She shook her head. "The article said she was engaged to a Julian Hartwell." Julian smiled, but it was a broken thing. "My father. He was Julian Hartwell, too. I'm Julian Hartwell, too, technically." The air whooshed out of her lungs. "So your father and Catherine—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Julian nodded. "They were in love. Engaged. She died before they could marry." Elena's heart twisted painfully. "What happened?" Another long silence. "Officially, an accident," Julian said, his voice brittle. "She fell from the balcony at Wyndham House. But my father never believed it. Neither did a lot of people." "Then what do you believe?" Elena whispered. Julian looked up at her then, and for the first time, Elena saw the full weight he carried. Guilt, grief, fear. "I think," he said carefully, "there are things about Wyndham House no one understands. Things that reach further back than any of us realize. And I think you're a part of it, Elena. Somehow." The room spun slightly around her. "Why me?" Julian stood, moving around the desk to stand before her. He was close now. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him, could see the small scar above his eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes. "Because you woke it up," he said, voice almost a whisper. "Whatever's been sleeping there, you brought it back." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. And yet, even as fear curled inside her, there was something else, too. Something reckless and fragile that reached for him. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, the storm raging quietly outside, the old secrets pressing in around them. Then, without thinking, Elena lifted her hand and touched his face. A tentative, trembling touch. Julian closed his eyes, exhaling shakily, and leaned into her palm. For one brief, shattering moment, it felt like they were the only two people left in the world. "I don't know if I can trust you," Elena whispered. "I don't blame you," Julian said, his voice breaking. But he caught her hand in his, gently, reverently, and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. And somehow, despite everything, Elena wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that whatever darkness waited in Wyndham House, whatever ghosts prowled her dreams, they would face it together, even if it destroyed them both. Chapter 6: The Blood in the Stone. The next morning the rain had stopped, but the world remained heavy and sodden, the sky a low gray ceiling. Elena stood in the cavernous entrance hall of Wyndham House, staring at the grand staircase. The previous night clung to her. Julian's words, his touch, the crackling electric sense that something had shifted between them. But so had the fear. "You woke it up," he had said, and whether he meant the past, the house, or something worse, she didn't know. What she did know, with a kind of grim certainty, was that the answers she needed were here, somewhere inside these crumbling walls. She tightened the scarf around her neck and headed toward the east wing, the one part of the house she hadn't explored yet. It had been sealed off when she moved in, the door swollen shut from years of neglect, the air beyond it cold and stale. But last night, after the storm, she'd noticed the door was slightly ajar, as if someone or something had invited her in. Elena pushed it open now with a soft creak. Dust swirled in the air, thick enough to taste. The wallpaper here was stripped to tatters, revealing bones of stone beneath. The hall stretched ahead of her, lit only by the faint gray light from cracked windows. At the end of the corridor stood a door, newer than the others, made of dark oak reinforced with iron. A heavy padlock hung from the latch, rusted and old. Elena approached it slowly, heart pounding. The lock was brittle with age. When she pressed against it, it snapped loose, the metal crumbling in her hand. She hesitated only a second longer before pulling the door open. The room beyond was circular, an old library, judging by the crumbling shelves that lined the curved stone walls. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and on that pedestal, a book, or what remained of one. The leather binding was cracked and rotted, the pages swollen from damp, but something about it, something wrong, made Elena's skin crawl. Slowly, she stepped inside. The air grew colder with every step, each breath burning in her lungs. Her fingers brushed the cover, and the world around her shifted. Suddenly, she wasn't standing in a decayed ruin. The library was whole again, alive with flickering candlelight and the scent of burning cedar. The books were intact, the air warm and heavy, and she wasn't alone. Across the room stood a woman, young, beautiful, with long dark hair and a dress the color of deep wine. She looked at Elena with wide, desperate eyes. "Please," the woman whispered, "don't trust him. He will betray you again." Before Elena could move, the vision shattered, the walls crumbling, the cold rushing back, and she was alone once more. Shaking, Elena opened the book. It wasn't a journal, as she had thought. It was a record. Names, dates, bloodlines. Generation after generation of Wyndham family members, some crossed out in dark ink, others annotated with chilling notes. Died at sea, lost to madness, murdered. And again, one phrase repeated beside certain names: the debt must be paid. At the bottom of the last page, written in a shaking hand, was a final entry. Judith Wyndham, 1912 to 1941, betrayed, blood paid in full. And then beneath it, newer ink: the blood calls again, the circle is not broken. Elena slammed the book shut, heart hammering against her ribs. The house hadn't simply been abandoned, it was cursed. A cycle of betrayal and death, paid in blood, generation after generation. And she was part of it now, whether she wanted to be or not. That evening, as the sun sank into a bank of clouds, Elena found herself sitting across from Julian again, this time at the old diner at the edge of town. The atmosphere between them was taut, charged with things neither knew how to say. "I found something," Elena said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian tensed. "At the house?" She nodded. "A book. Family records. It mentioned something about a debt, about blood needing to be paid." Julian closed his eyes for a moment, as if in pain. "I was hoping you wouldn't find it," he said. "At least, not yet." "Why?" "Because once you know," Julian said quietly, "it's harder to escape." He leaned forward, bracing his arms on the table. His sleeves had slipped back slightly, and Elena noticed, for the first time, a scar along his wrist. A thin, pale line. Not recent, not accidental. Something in her chest twisted. "What happened to Catherine?" she asked softly. "The truth." Julian hesitated for so long, Elena thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Catherine found out about the curse, about the Wyndham bloodline. She tried to break it." "How?" "By leaving," Julian said. "By breaking the engagement to my father. But the house, it doesn't let go so easily, and neither do the people it owns." Elena swallowed hard. "Are you saying she was killed?" Julian's gaze met hers. Dark, haunted. "I'm saying she didn't fall." The diner around them buzzed with low conversation and clinking dishes, oblivious to the earth shifting beneath their feet. Elena wanted to reach across the table, to touch him, to anchor herself in the only thing that still felt real. The way he looked at her, as if she mattered more than anything else. But before she could move, Julian said, "You need to leave Wyndham Bay, Elena. Now. Tonight. Before it's too late." Something inside her cracked, a deep, aching fracture. "Are you sending me away because you care?" she asked, voice trembling, "or because you're afraid of what I'll find out about you?" Julian flinched as if she had slapped him. "I'm not my father," he said fiercely. "I'm not the man who let her die." "But you're hiding something," Elena said. "I can feel it." Julian raked a hand through his hair, the mask slipping. For a moment he looked young, vulnerable, desperate. "I'm trying to protect you," he said. "God, Elena, you don't know what this house does to people. It warps them, twists love into obsession, devotion into madness." "And us?" she whispered. "Is that what this is?" For a moment, the raw truth was written across his face. "I don't know," Julian said brokenly. "But I know if you stay, it'll destroy you. And I can't." He cut himself off, voice strangled. "I can't watch that happen again." Tears blurred Elena's vision, but she blinked them back savagely. "I'm not Catherine," she said. "No," Julian said, standing abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. "You're something worse." He tossed a few bills onto the table and turned away before she could answer, disappearing into the rain-slicked darkness outside, leaving Elena alone with only the echo of his words ringing in her ears. Something worse. And deep down she knew the truth she was hunting wasn't just about the house. It was about herself, her past, her blood. And if she didn't find it soon, it might kill her. Or worse, it might turn her into the very thing she feared. Chapter 7. The night swallowed Wyndham Bay whole. A mist rolled in from the sea, so thick that the town's lights became distant smudges, and even the familiar creak of the house felt foreign, distorted. Wyndham House seemed to breathe with the fog, its stones weeping with damp, its heartbeat thrumming through the floorboards under Elena's bare feet. She hadn't gone after Julian. She couldn't. His words were still too raw, too jagged inside her. "You're something worse." She roamed the halls of the house instead, clutching a candle like some desperate wraith, the tiny flame fighting against the vast dark. The letters haunted her, tucked away now in the drawer of her bedroom dresser. All of them written in the same elegant hand, the ink faded but still potent with longing. But the last letter, the one she hadn't shown Julian, was different. Not just a warning, but a confession. "I loved you once, across lifetimes. I lost you once to betrayal. I will not lose you again. This time, I will make sure nothing stands between us." The candle guttered in a sudden draft, and Elena froze. From somewhere deeper in the house came the sound of footsteps. Not the polite, deliberate tread of someone approaching, but something slower, heavier. A dragging, reluctant sound. She spun around, lifting the candle high. "Hello?" Her voice cracked the heavy silence. No answer. The house seemed to close in around her. Heart hammering, Elena followed the sound down the main staircase and through the arched doorway into the abandoned west wing. The air was colder here. The floorboards groaned underfoot. Ahead, a shadow flitted across the hall. Too fast, too shapeless to identify. Elena's breath came in shallow bursts. Logic screamed at her to run, but something deeper, older, kept her feet moving. The shadow slipped through a half-open door at the end of the corridor. Elena pushed it open and stepped into the ballroom. The chandeliers were dark, the great windows fogged with age, but the room was unmistakable. This was where her dreams had brought her, where faceless waltzers had spun her through centuries of grief. In the center of the floor stood a figure. Not a ghost, not a monster, a man. At first she thought it was Julian, the broad shoulders, the dark hair. But as he turned, the candlelight caught his face, and her heart stopped. It wasn't Julian, it was the postman, Thomas, the young man who had always smiled at her so shyly when delivering packages, who had slipped letters through her mail slot with trembling hands. Thomas's eyes gleamed in the low light, wild, feverish, his hands hung limp at his sides, fingers twitching. "You came," he said, voice a broken whisper. Elena took a step back instinctively. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" He smiled, a cracked, pitiful thing. "I waited," he said. "I waited so long, and now you're finally here." The candle flickered violently, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. "I don't understand," Elena said, voice shaking. "You wrote the letters?" Thomas nodded eagerly. "I had to remind you," he said, "remind you of what we had, of who you are." "I don't know you," Elena whispered. "But you do." His voice sharpened, splintering into something manic. "In another life, you were mine, before he stole you, before you betrayed me." Elena's skin went cold. This wasn't simple obsession, it was madness, and something told her it had been festering long before she ever arrived. "Thomas, you're confused," she said carefully, edging toward the door. "That wasn't me. That was someone else, someone a long time ago." "No," he said fiercely. "It was you, your soul. I see it in your eyes." He took a step toward her. "You don't belong with him," Thomas said, his face twisting into something raw and ugly. "He'll betray you too, just like before, but I won't. I would die before I hurt you." Elena's hand fumbled for the door handle. "Thomas, please." The ballroom doors slammed shut behind her without warning. Elena cried out, spinning around, but no one was there. When she turned back, Thomas was weeping, fat, miserable tears rolling down his cheeks. "I loved you," he sobbed. "I loved you so much. Why wasn't it enough?" Before she could respond, the heavy doors burst open. Julian. He stood framed in the doorway, eyes blazing, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. His gaze locked onto Thomas, and Elena saw something ancient flicker in his face. Recognition, old hatred. "Step away from her," Julian said, his voice low and lethal. Thomas bared his teeth like a cornered animal. "You took her from me once?" he snarled. "You think you'll do it again?" Julian stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "This isn't the way," he said. "This isn't her. It's over, Thomas." Thomas shook his head violently, tears flying. "No," he said, "it's never over, not until the blood is paid." He lunged, but not at Elena, at Julian. The two men crashed together, grappling. Elena stumbled back, the candle falling from her hand and snuffing out. For a moment, all she could hear was the sound of fists, of bodies slamming into the floor, then a sharp cry of pain, and silence. When her eyes adjusted to the dim light from the hallway beyond, she saw Julian standing over Thomas's crumpled form. Blood stained Julian's shirt sleeve, but he was upright, breathing hard. Thomas lay still, moaning softly, the fight gone from him. Elena ran to Julian's side. "Are you hurt?" she gasped. Julian shook his head, but his face was grim. "He needs help," Julian said. "Real help, not jail, not punishment." Elena nodded, dazed, as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Someone, probably one of the townsfolk, must have seen or heard the commotion and called the police. Julian sank to his knees beside Thomas, pressing a hand against the bleeding cut at his temple. "You're not alone," he said quietly. "Not anymore." And for the first time, Elena saw not just the man who had been keeping secrets, but the man who had been fighting against them all along. A man who had chosen love over fear. Her heart cracked wide open. When Julian turned to her, there were tears in his eyes. "I should have told you everything from the start," he said. "But I was afraid if you knew how broken this place, how broken I really was, you'd run." Elena knelt beside him, reaching for his hand. "I'm not running," she said. The sirens grew louder, the world pressing in. But in that moment, kneeling on the cold stone floor of the cursed house, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, Elena felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope and love. Not the fevered, desperate love of past lives, but something real. Something earned, something worth fighting for. As the authorities stormed the ballroom and the past finally began to crumble away, Elena squeezed Julian's hand and whispered, "We'll break the cycle. Together." And for the first time, she believed it. Chapter 8, The Circle Breaks. The morning after everything ended, or began again, Wyndham Bay woke under a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. Sunlight poured over the town, spilling gold across cracked sidewalks and dewy fields, painting even the tired bones of Wyndham House with a kind of fragile hope. Elena sat on the front steps of the house, knees drawn to her chest, a mug of black coffee cooling between her palms. She hadn't slept. Not after the police took Thomas away. Not after the long hours answering questions she barely knew how to explain without sounding like a madwoman. Not after Julian left, promising he'd return. A promise that had felt both too heavy and too light, like all promises between people who have nearly lost each other. The house behind her groaned and creaked, settling back into silence. No whispers, no phantom footsteps, just the sound of the wind stirring the ivy. Maybe for the first time in a century, the house was at peace. But Elena wasn't sure she was. Not yet. A crunch of footsteps on the gravel made her look up. Julian stood at the gate, a brown paper bag under one arm, a cautious, almost boyish smile tugging at his mouth. "You look like you could use breakfast," he said. Elena gave a small, breathless laugh and nodded. He climbed the steps and sat beside her without asking permission, without the kind of careful, deliberate distance he had kept between them before. As if last night had stripped all the polite walls away. From the bag, he pulled out 2 pastries and a thermos. "Althea at the bakery insisted," he said. "Apparently feeding people after near-death experiences is a town tradition." Elena bit into the pastry and nearly wept at the taste. For a while they ate in silence, the good kind, easy and natural. Then Julian spoke, his voice low. "I went to the town archives this morning." Elena turned to him, heart thudding. "I needed to know," he said, "about you, about why the house called you here." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handed it to her. Elena unfolded it with trembling fingers, a birth certificate. Her mother's name, Margaret Wyndham. Her father's name left blank. But there, unmistakable, was the seal of Wyndham Bay. "I don't understand," Elena said, blinking fast. "My mother never told me. She ran," Julian said softly. "She broke away from the family before it could destroy her, changed her name, disappeared. Maybe she thought if she kept you away, you'd be safe." Elena stared down at the certificate, her throat closing. All the years of feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. All the restless nights wondering why home always felt like a place she hadn't found yet. It was here. It had always been here, in blood and stone and memory. "You're the last Wyndham," Julian said. "The house, it was always meant for you." A laugh bubbled up in Elena's chest, wild, incredulous. "Great," she said. "A haunted, crumbling, cursed estate. Every girl's dream." Julian smiled, but there was sadness in it. "It doesn't have to stay cursed," he said. "Cycles break, Houses heal, so do people. Elena looked at him then, really looked, at the man who had carried generations of guilt on his back, who had tried to push her away to save her, who had fought for her even when it broke him. She reached out and took his hand, warm, solid, real. "I don't want to do this alone," she said quietly. "You don't have to," Julian said. His thumb brushed over the back of her hand, tentative, reverent. "Not ever again." The words cracked something inside her, a shell she hadn't realized she was still wearing. She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to simply be held. They sat like that for a long time while the house breathed around them. Not a threat now, but a home. In the weeks that followed, Wyndham House changed. The town rallied, first out of morbid curiosity, then out of something warmer. Elena found herself accepting offers of help without the stubborn pride that had once kept her isolated. Painters, carpenters, gardeners, all people who had once whispered behind her back, now showed up at her doorstep with tools and pies and shy smiles. The ballroom was the first to be repaired. Elena had thought about tearing it down, erasing the memories carved into its walls, but Julian had convinced her otherwise. "It deserves a second chance," he said. "So do we." So the chandeliers were cleaned, the floors polished, the cracked windows replaced with stained glass that threw rainbows across the floor when the sun hit just right. And one afternoon, as the sun slanted low over the bay, Elena stood in the center of the ballroom, this time not in a dream but wide awake, and danced with Julian. There was no music, just the sound of the sea beyond the cliffs and their laughter and the steady thump of her heart against his chest. Slow, careful, reverent, as if they had all the time in the world. Because they did. Because they had finally broken free. On the night of the house's reopening, a modest, clumsy, beautiful party thrown together by half the town, Elena stood in the front hall, watching the light and life fill the space that had once been a tomb. Julian came up behind her, slipping an arm around her waist. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. Elena smiled, blinking back tears. "No," she said, "we did." He turned her to face him, eyes dark and serious. "There's one more thing," he said. He pulled something from his pocket, not a ring, not yet, but a small, battered silver key. "The east wing," he said. "The final door, the one no one's opened in decades." Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. Together they crossed the hall and stood before the sealed door. Julian slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open. Inside, the room was small, plain, a nursery once, perhaps. On the far wall hung a single portrait, a woman with dark hair and laughing eyes. Elena stepped closer and gasped. It was her mother, younger, freer, but unmistakable. Below the portrait was a plaque, Margaret Wyndham. She chose freedom. She chose love. Tears blurred Elena's vision. Julian slipped his hand into hers and squeezed. "You come from love," he said, "not from curses, not from blood debts. That's what you carry forward." Elena pressed her forehead against his chest, overcome. They stayed like that until the music from the ballroom swelled again, and the house, their house, sang with life. And for the first time, truly Elena believed, the past could be forgiven. The future could be built. Love, real, messy, beautiful love, could endure. And it would. Here. Together. The end. If you enjoyed this journey through whispers and secrets, make sure to subscribe for more thrilling tales of love, mystery, and suspense. There's always more to uncover. Until next time, stay tuned and let the whispers guide you.